Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming and welcome to the 9 millionth Marin County District Attorney debate, candidate debate. We're pleased to put on this debate by a coalition of sensible taxpayers. My name's Doug Kelly. Just a quick introduction to our awesome moderator. Ms. Leah Wilson is the Executive Director of the State Bar of California. She graduated law school from Berkeley and went to UC Santa Barbara? San Diego. With that, we did send some questions to Ms. Wilson. She is in total charge of the questions and will ask whatever she wants. We'll take some questions from the audience. Mimi and I will go around with some pads and some pens, and then we'll just give them to the moderator. With that, I'm going to exit stage left. Thank you so much. Stage right.
Push the button.
Okay. Good evening. So we are going to start off with 2-minute opening statements from each of you. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with that drill. And then I'm going to proceed in a rotational order with questions for each of you. And thank you in advance to my timekeeper. Most of the questions will have a 2-minute response time, but I have some that are a little shorter. And so I'll indicate that with the question. I am going to pause after about 60 minutes and take questions, any questions from the audience that I've received at that time. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started with opening statements. We'll start off with Lori. Thank you.
How's that? Thank you. Good evening. I'm Lori Fragoli. I'm a 28-year veteran of the District Attorney's Office, lifelong resident and lifelong Democrat. Your next district attorney in this county needs to be somebody who knows how to walk the walk. This is not a management position. And yes, it's true, you're going to hear it's been many years since somebody from outside of the district attorney's office has had this position. And I submit to you that's for pretty good reason. It takes somebody with an experienced hand to run this office. Someone who, for example, today, when there was an active shooter in Mill Valley, if you were to get a call, would know how to handle it and tell law enforcement, yes, you can do this. No, you can't do this. You need a search warrant for that. Somebody who's handled murder cases in the middle of the night and advised officers how to handle those situations. I have that experience. As a 28-year veteran in the DA's office, I have a unique background because I also was a police officer before that. So I carry with me that experience when I go to the table and when I talk to officers and I tell them they've done wrong. They respect me and they understand that and they hear me. You also need a district attorney who knows that we need to be accountable to you. That's why from day one in my platform, I put it on my Facebook and also on my website. One of the platforms, in addition to safety of the community, which is a priority, and that is our job to keep you safe, is reform the culture of the office and make it more inclusive, transparent, and accountable. From day one, I have that in my platform because I know that's important to our community and particularly to you. We are not necessarily doing the best job that we could be doing in the DA's office, and I intend to make that change. One thing that I suggested to my staff is that we have an efficiency study, and some people took an affront to that. They took it as a threat. I take that as a positive means of showing the community that we are accountable. We need to show you what we are doing with your time, your money, and our time to keep you safe. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out and learning a little bit more about this district attorney race. My name is AJ Brady, and I'm running for district attorney. I'm a Bay Area native. I grew up in San Francisco and right here in the city of San Rafael. I went through local schools. I did end up going to St. Ignatius High School, no booze, please, and came back here to the city of Corte Madera, where I live with my wife and my 2 daughters. I'm a career prosecutor here with the Marin County District Attorney's Office. I'm very proud of my record in court. I've prosecuted every type of crime there is, from DUI to domestic violence, sexual assault, and homicide cases. I'm very proud of how I've been able to keep the community safe in the prosecution of those cases in the courtroom. But I'm also very proud of how we've approached and how I've personally approached other parts outside of the courtroom in keeping our community safe. I know from firsthand experience that we do need to make change, and I've tried to work for change within the office by pushing for programs such as ones that provide housing in lieu of incarceration for chronic alcoholics in order to break the cycle of jail to street that we see right out here on our streets in the downtown San Rafael area. In order to better serve our victims, I created one of the first restorative justice programs for adults in the United States because I saw a need, and I've worked to change within the system and allocate towards that need. And seeing that veterans weren't being served within our community, I formed a coalition, brought in VJSO, VA, to better serve and exchange information about how to provide sentencing for those who have served our country. Sentencing that's aligned with potential illnesses that they may have gotten through their services. I've worked for the last 13 years within the system to change it, to make it an office that better serves the needs of the people, the needs of the community that I grew up in, and the community that I want to raise my own children in. I'd ask for your support, and thank you again so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you all for being here this evening. My name's Anna Pletcher, and I'm running for district attorney. Did you know that it has been 20 years since we have had a contested district attorney's election in Marin County? It has been more than 70 years since someone from outside the district attorney's office has had that top job. That is a long time to be recycling the same ideas. It is time for a fresh perspective. It is time to think bigger, to do new things, and that is why I am running. I was a federal prosecutor for 10 years, worked my way up to assistant chief of my office, where I managed an office of 40 employees, including 25 attorneys. I've been deeply involved in the community, fighting for women and children, and now at the DA's office, after 70 years, we have a chance to bring change. What could that look like? Well, let's start by doing better for victims, doing better for families, and bringing our DA's office into the 21st century. Let's start with making sure that victims of sexual assault have access to the full compassionate care that they need right here in Marin County by bringing rape kit examinations right here. Let's make sure that we fix our bail system and move away from the money bail system that we know doesn't work and we know doesn't keep us safer. Let's fight the racial injustice that's embedded in our criminal justice system and has made Marin one of the top most racially unequal counties in the state of California. Let's make sure our kids stay on track and in school with restorative justice programs and keep them safe every day. These are smart reforms that will keep us safer, build our stronger community, and save taxpayer dollars. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Marin Democratic Party, the Sierra Club, Indivisible Marin, Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey, and I hope to earn your support as well. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you see as the most important criminal justice issue facing Marin County? And what specifically do you plan to do to address it? And I'm going to start with AJ.
I think the biggest criminal justice issue that there is right now is the prevalence of untreated mental illness that manifests itself in criminality. It's sort of like an icing that goes over absolutely everything that we see, and from our street-level crimes to bizarre interactions between defendants and police officers, all the way up to crimes in the household. And so it's really an umbrella level of offenses that we don't have and haven't for several decades in the state of California had very comprehensive treatment of those who are mentally ill. People have been allowed to languish on the streets. And although I've been working in this system for the last 13 years to try to bring change right here in Marin County, that change has been slow and stymied by the lack of state resources. I've been proud to be members of several organizations within the county of Marin to look to tie together resources and develop case management plans for those individuals who commit crimes as a result of their mental illness, and it was a way to encourage treatment. Having formerly been our office's mental health court deputy and in charge of our STAR court, which is our mental health court, I've seen the amazing changes that can happen when people who have untreated mental illness are able to stabilize on medication over the course of time. And it's my belief that our justice system needs to pivot around that and you see those efforts through the development of things like Laura's Law and other laws meant to expand different treatment options, different housing options for those individuals who are suffering from untreated mental illness. That doesn't at first blush seem like a criminal justice issue, but when you see over and over again that as an issue tainting crimes throughout that are referred to our office, you see that addressing mental health first will have a profound effect on public safety later.
Thank you. Yes, mental health is an important issue in Marin County, and I wrote an op-ed in the Marin IJ about 2 months ago that highlights my plan on that point, but I'd like to talk about domestic violence, which is the most common violent crime in Marin County and has been for a very long time. The county has made some great strides in addressing domestic violence. We have a number of wonderful nonprofits out there, but what I'd like to do is to think bigger on this point. I would like to consider creating a family justice center. This was a movement that is starting to sweep the country. The gold standards right now are in Alameda and in Sonoma, and I visited both of their centers, and here's what it is. It's a facility, a single place, where all of the services that domestic violence victims need are located in the same place. That is that's counseling, mental health, daycare, job employment services, faith services, rape counseling, including the district attorney and law enforcement, all in one place. And it's an amazing concept. When someone enters this facility, they get greeted by a navigator who does an intake and figures out what their needs are and connects them right there. Because that's the key right now for dealing with systemic challenges like domestic violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, and elder abuse. If we pull all of these things together in one place, we can have the access to all the services right there. It was actually a prosecutor who started this concept because they know that when you provide great services for victims, you can actually prosecute cases better. That's what they're doing in Sonoma and in Alameda and in Contra Costa. I'd like to consider bringing that here and connecting people to the fantastic services that are already there and prosecuting these cases so that we can all be safer.
Who knows what our number one crime that's reported in Marin and the reports that are received in my office? Who could guess what that is? Well, I recently asked some defense attorneys and they all got it wrong. And in fact, I had to make a specific request to my boss for the top 10 crimes that are reported to my office because it wasn't easily accessible. That's why one of my transparency promises to the community is to have a dashboard so that you can go to our website at any point in time and see the kinds of cases we're receiving, what we're doing with them, how we're filing them. And the number one crime reported to my office is DUI. We had more than 1,200 of those last year. The number 10 crime is a form of domestic violence. So it's really important that we think about drugs in addition to alcohol, because we also have a serious opioid abuse problem in this county. One of my platforms is to have a documentary. I probably have 30 people now who have stepped forward and offered to be a part of my documentary because it's so prevalent. So we need to educate our children about drinking and driving and drug abuse. We need to educate our adults, and we need to take that information and education into our schools and the teachers. We need to partner with community members such as Alcohol Justice. It's a statewide program that supports me, and they go into schools, and they also are on the streets teaching leadership programs to young people in our community on to how to not have alcohol be a crucial part of their life. We really need to be looking at our youth because they are our future, and that's my thought on that issue. Thank you.
Okay. Proposition 47, approved by the voters of California in 2017, reclassified and downgraded a number of serious crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. Please describe how Proposition 47 has been implemented in Marin County and explain what your thoughts are as to its impact in the county. And we'll begin with Anna this time. Thank you.
Sure. Proposition 47 was designed to fight mass incarceration. Mass incarceration is a failed policy. We know that locking people up and throwing away the key not only is a very bad and irresponsible financial decision, it also doesn't keep us safer. And we've seen deep problems in terms of racial injustice, socioeconomic bias. So the question is, how do we move beyond that? Prop 47 attempted to address that, and I support what it did, which was downgrading the certain offenses so that there would be less jail time imposed. There's been quite a controversy that's come up about Prop 47 because there's been an increased number of small petty thefts and car break-ins that may be tied to Proposition 47. The truth is the data isn't quite out there to know exactly what the source is of these little increases that we're seeing. There are two fixes going through the state legislature right now, and that's a good thing. We need to fix the patches in Prop 47, but still maintain the basic values behind it, which is keeping people safe, finding other ways to keep people accountable, and avoiding the mass incarceration piece of it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what types of legislation passes to patch those holes. But at the same time, we need to continue keeping people safe and having alternatives to mass incarceration. That means robust diversion programs. That means restorative justice programs. That means stopping the cycles of recidivism. And we know how to do that. There are lots of great ways that we can do that, boosting our diversion and restorative justice, and I support doing both of those things.
Lori, thank you. Prop 47 was a well-intentioned piece of legislation. However, I think it has not been successful. The one positive point I would say about it is expungements. I support expungements in regards to Prop 47. It does give people who have been successful on probation an opportunity to have a crime taken from their record. So I think that's been one positive aspect of it. Other than that, I think it's been not very successful in any way, shape, or form. For those of you who've not paid attention, George Gascon, who was one of the primary promoters of this proposition, because of the rise in auto burglaries in San Francisco, just had to go to his board of supervisors and ask for $1 million so he could prosecute the people who are committing these crimes. And what Prop 47 did is take a lot of crimes that were felonies before, which meant you could keep a person in jail longer, and sometimes that's an opportunity for treatment for people, and made them misdemeanors. For example, there are groups of people that go up and down the freeway stealing $949 worth of merchandise time after time after time because they know $950 is the limit for it being a felony. Then an officer stops them, and the person will actually tell them, you can't take me to jail because I know this is under $950. So that part of it's been a failure, and those people unfortunately keep committing these crimes. So it does need to be revamped. I do understand the premise behind it, but I support very little of what Proposition 47 has ended up to be. It just has not been successful in any way, shape, or form. We do have diversion programs, but again, you have to have an incentive sometimes to really lead a law-abiding life, and Prop 47 unfortunately was not the answer. Thank you.
The intent of Prop 47, again, was fairly laudable. There were individuals who for decades had their employment, had their housing, had their records marred, mostly by drug offenses. And so the primary thrust of Prop 47 was to not decriminalize, but lower the criminalization of most drug offenses from what are called, in our parlance, wobblers. They could be felonies, they could be misdemeanors, to just straight misdemeanors, and then allow people to petition to go back and change their old records that said felony down to misdemeanors. That's a net benefit, and I think we've taken the bull by the horns and handled a lot of those petitions. We do them on a daily basis, and it's the right thing to do, because it shouldn't have been that people who are struggling with addiction would have that additional barriers to their employability, towards their housing, that only compound the problems with addiction. So that part of the proposition was a good thing. I will say, though, that there were individuals that really struggled with addiction, and occasionally it would be nice to have more leverage to push an individual into an evidence-based program like an adult drug court, which we lack because of the universality of those things being misdemeanors. The other thing that Prop 47 did was it reclassified many theft-based crimes, again, to just misdemeanors, not eligible as felonies. And again, for the vast majority of the crimes that came through, this is a net benefit, in that people could clean up their records for felonies when there was a low dollar amount. And again, they would be allowed to potentially apply for jobs, housing, credit reports would be cleaned up. And that's a good thing for the most part. But there were certainly abuses of it, and all those things which Lori mentioned, there was aspects of it, criminals being emboldened by knowing a dollar amount. And I do think there's fixes that need to go about that, but as a whole, it's probably been a net benefit for the majority of people affected.
Okay, I'm going to ask a 1-minute follow-up to that question for each of you, because I'm not quite sure that you explained for the audience what the impact of Prop 47 has been here in Marin County. I do understand some of the answers with respect to statewide or other counties, but to the extent possible, if you could describe for the audience what the impact has been here in Marin, I would appreciate that. And we'll go in the same order, 60 seconds, starting with Anna.
Sure, and the impact that I know of is from the ride-alongs that I've done with police in our county, where I've done 11 ride-alongs and seen every single officer talking about the petty thefts increases that they've had to deal with right here. And I think that's what you see here in terms of the potential, the failure of Prop 47. But I'm not ready to admit that this has failed. I don't think it has. The intent is still there. It is still working. We have a lot of good pieces to it, but we need to plug these gaps that are there. And look, state legislature is working on that.
Lori?
Primarily a rise in our misdemeanor caseload. We have calendars, misdemeanor calendars. You're welcome to come any day of the week at 9 o'clock and 1:30 in Department M and see how many people are stuck in the misdemeanor courtroom cycle because of these offenses that are coming under Prop 47. So that's one thing that's really impacted our caseload, and now we need more misdemeanor attorneys to handle these cases, and some of them, the people do have drug problems and alcohol problems, and we don't have the means to take care of them, especially on a misdemeanor level. We can't get people supervised by the probation department on a misdemeanor case, so that makes it really unfortunate. The other thing I would say is that instead of being booked at the jail, which is not always a good thing because that opens the door to the whole bail reform issue, which is, I'm sure, another question coming up. But what happens is people get citations to appear, then they don't come to court, a warrant is issued, and in 2016 we had 1,500 warrants issued for people who didn't come to court when they were supposed to. So that's my basic reaction to how it's impacted our courtroom on a daily basis.
So one of the few evidence-based interventions in the court system is adult drug courts as a model that's been studied, and I'll say that the population of our adult drug court used to be made up strictly of people whose charges were possession or being under the influence, and we built the court around that. But it's an intensive court. You come to court every single week, and at the end you get your case dismissed, but it's very intensive for a long period of time. With the advent of Prop 47, fewer and fewer people charged with just straight possession were opting to go into this court because it was too intensive when compared to the misdemeanor sanctions that are available for it. Now our adult drug court is made up of a very different population. And again, that goes back to the idea of, at times, it is important to have leverage to offer a carrot and stick type of rationale for people, and Prop 47 did take away some of our ability to do that.
Thank you. Well, you teed up the next question, Lori. So I believe you have all stated that you support pretrial detention reform. Please describe the specific steps you would take to reduce pretrial incarceration and address whether those steps will include the elimination of money bail. And the first respondent is Lori.
Thank you. I do support the elimination of money bail. I would support all the factors and suggestions from the report by the specialized committee that was reported by Chief Justice Taney of our state Supreme Court, as far as having a plan in place to make sure the community is safe and that victims are protected and that the people return to court. That's going to require more than a minute or 2 minutes to address. I did write an op-ed about our current pretrial options that we have for people in the county, and there are quite a few. You might be surprised, so please take my literature outside. But basically, what we need to do is find a way to make sure that people know to come back to court. If they have a drug problem, that they stay sober. If they have an alcohol problem, that they stay sober. So we have scram devices, which are bracelets we fit to a person to make sure they're not drinking. If they drink, an alarm goes off and the court's notified. So please look at my op-ed and also look at the report to the Chief Justice, because it's going to take a lot of money and it's going to take a lot of thought and experienced people to evaluate these people to make sure that we can get them back to court.
So not all courts are the same in terms of their resources and abilities. And believe it or not, although we're an affluent county, we are a small county, a small to medium-sized county, and our resources are more reflective of small counties than they are of large counties. My first legal job was actually working in San Diego County, a very large county, doing pretrial services work, doing risk assessments and supervising people for release. There is no supervised release here in Marin County. There are limited options for pretrial release here. In other words, we don't have a lot of the infrastructure that large counties have, and in order to adequately fulfill the promise of the ending cash bail, we do need to have robust alternatives to cash bail. And so we are in a quandary. Case law has changed, and we do need to push that forward. And at this time, we don't have the built-up infrastructure. So the first thing I would do in answer to the question is start to advocate for those infrastructure changes so that we can have robust options to release individuals. After that, we move through our population. We're 87% misdemeanor county, and I think we need to begin with looking at all of our options around those populations and move from there, whether the infrastructure is there or not.
I have been an ardent advocate of bail reform for a long time. As a federal prosecutor, we do not have money bail in the federal system. Many, many years ago, more than 50 years ago, it was abolished. It was Bobby Kennedy actually who led the fight there, because it doesn't make sense on a number of levels. It's not, there's a fairness issue, but it also doesn't keep people safe. Because if your money, whether you get out of jail pre-trial depends on how much money you have. It doesn't matter how dangerous you are to the community or how likely you are to flee. It's all about how much money you have in your pocket. And it results in people spending time in jail at taxpayer expense when they should be out getting on with their lives. And we have ways to make sure that when people are out, they do not commit new crimes and they come back. And California is so far behind here. Kentucky has already done it. New Jersey's already done it. We can use risk assessments. We can even use simple tools as text reminders, which work to get people back. This is something Marin County needs to do and needs to lead on. We can do it.
Okay. I believe both in this debate and in previous forums, each of you have emphasized or identified the serious problem that the mentally ill population presents in the criminal justice system. So I'd like you to focus on this response to the strategies, the specific strategies that you would employ to provide effective alternatives to incarceration for this population, and also to identify, as something that you raised in your response to the last question, AJ, how these alternatives would be funded or how they might be funded in this county. And so I believe the first one up for this is AJ.
Okay.
Thank you.
So with regard to mental illness in Marin County, while it's, I think, pervasive around the criminal justice community, we also have robust voluntary services put forth by our Department of Health and Human Services, mental health divisions. They're mostly geared around those individuals who voluntarily engage and are at least well aware enough that they can say, I need help. Those aren't the people that come through the criminal justice system by and large. Those populations don't necessarily voluntarily engage in services, but that doesn't mean that there's not a parallel infrastructure already in place to be transitioned for our population. What we need to be doing over and over again, because the population isn't that large, is universal assessments of individuals for mental illness as they're coming through the criminal justice system. It means that as they're being contacted by law enforcement, or whether they're booked in the jail, that individuals are assessed for whether or not they are or are not mentally ill. That information, that data needs to inform charging practices and settlement practices on those individuals, so that as a significant portion of the plea negotiations, you create a system that encourages individuals to either become medication compliant or treatment compliant, and that parallel infrastructure exists right now. So how you do that, though, is you essentially case manage every single person who has a mental illness in the county. That sounds daunting, but our numbers are not that daunting. It is very possible, very plausible for us to develop case management plans for all those individuals who have serious mental illness within Marin County who are committing crimes. And then we have to have the wherewithal and the gumption to stick with those things when people are in or outside of the criminal justice system.
So I toured our jail a couple of months ago. We have 300 inmates in our jail, and the sheriffs said to me they believe that 1/3 of them are there with a mental illness, and some of them very severe. We don't have the resources to treat people who are in our jail, to treat their mental illness, and so they stay there. They stay there, and they are warehoused there, and that is not a healthy thing. That is not responsible for our taxpayers. That is not a good thing for them or for our society. So what do? How do we fix this problem? Let's keep people with mental illness out of the criminal justice system in the first place. That means as soon as they come into contact with law enforcement, we're able to provide a mobile crisis unit, for example, that can be right there, where we can identify someone with a problem and make sure that they get to somewhere where they can get the treatment they need. I mean, to be very honest, we do not have enough beds in Marin County to house the people who need them. We just don't. And that's going to be a point where we, as a county, will have to decide that we need to commit the resources to do it because it's a priority for us. And as the district attorney, I will advocate for that because I know how important it is to get our mentally ill people the treatment they need instead of warehousing them in our jails. We also must focus on prevention. Let's go upstream. Let's make sure that we provide mental health treatment before someone reaches a crisis point. For example, I'm on the Wellness Advisory Board in our Tam High Unified School Districts, where we provide wellness centers in our high schools that have free, confidential, on-site mental health counseling. If we can catch kids before they get to that crisis point, let's get them the treatment they need and keep them out of the criminal justice system. Prevention is really key here.
The two major problems, money and housing, neither of which we have enough of, and neither of which anybody is willing to step up to pay for. I think the immediate situation is only going to be remedied by collaboration with community partners, frankly. We don't have the money to house these people when they end up in the criminal justice system. Most of them don't belong there. We have a great program in our county called Star Court. It's our mental health court. My office is the gatekeeper of that program. I think that's wrong. I think the judges and the people in the jail who see these people on a daily basis should be the gatekeepers of that program. If that were to happen, we would have more people from within the system, whether they're in custody or not, have access to that program. And I think the judges will support me in that, and that is one of my platforms in this campaign, that we need to have, when we have current programs in the county, which that's the one that we do have and we have the resources, we should be giving more people opportunity to have that program. And sometimes they may fail. That's part of the struggle of many things in life, but we need to be giving people that opportunity. The other situation I really promote is on the street as far as providing housing. There's a program in Santa Rosa called the Palms. It is a partnership with Catholic Charities and the County of Sonoma, and that has been a very successful wraparound program for homeless people, people with drug problems, and also people with mental illness. You have to cooperate in the program to live there. It's been so successful that the hospitals have given money to that program because they're not taking care of the people on the other end. So I think that's how we need to be looking outside the box to help this program. Thank you.
Let's turn to a relationship with law enforcement. As the DA, how would you balance the need to have effective collaborative working relationships with your law enforcement agencies in the county and your necessary role as an entity that holds law enforcement accountable? And we'll start with you, Anna.
So developing relationships with law enforcement is essential because the relationship between the law enforcement and the DA at bottom, I'll just explain how this works, is law enforcement is out on the street every day. They're the ones who are responding to calls. They're the ones who are doing investigations and gathering evidence. Then they bring that evidence to the district attorney to make a decision whether to prosecute or not. And it's true that if there is a case of police misconduct, it's the district attorney who is responsible for doing an investigation and deciding whether a prosecution needs to happen. So the DA has to develop a good working relationship with law enforcement at arm's length enough to be independent enough to bring a good decision should there be a case where law enforcement misconduct arises. My view on this is, one, building the relationships. I have mentioned before that I've done 11 ride-alongs with police all over the county. That's very intentional to make sure that I understand what our police officers are facing day to day and that they understand who I am and feel that we have an open line of communication. And that's the thing that I heard from officers the most. They want to be able to know that the DA's office is transparent and is listening to them. Might not always agree on everything, but having that relationship is key. The other piece, when it comes to police officer misconduct, and I don't know if we'll get into this later tonight, but the DA's office has to be public and transparent and have protocols for how we handle these things that the public knows about, that police officers know about, that we stick to a standard protocol for every situation where it is needed. That way we know that everybody is operating on a fair and transparent basis. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. One of the first things that I did when I decided to run for office was to go talk to district attorneys in other counties, particularly Sonoma County, because I think they're 5 to 10 years ahead of us in all the crimes and the situations they've had to deal with. So I like to learn from those who have already been there and done that. And the second thing I did was talk to the police chiefs in our county. And I sat down with them and said, hey, what can we do to better serve your department? And boy, did I get an earful. And sometimes it's just a matter of going back to some old school values, which I intend to do, and which is part of my platform, which is every police department in this county is going to have a liaison as far as a assigned deputy DA and also a support staff who's not an attorney, and they're going to be that contact person for that department in my office. So if they have a problem with one of their cases or want to know what's going on with a certain case in our office, they can call their liaison, and that liaison is going to go out to their department, going to leave the office, go out in the community, because that's part of my platform, connecting the community to that courthouse. And it's really important to keep that trust and gain the trust of our community and law enforcement. They're going to ride along, they're going to attend briefings, they're going to go to DUI checkpoints so that we have a better understanding relationship with our law enforcement partners. It's crucial that we have a great relationship with them and a respect and a trust. And that's where my experience comes to the table. And the fact that I had the wherewithal to go talk to them and ask them, what can we do better for you? We're going to streamline our search warrant process because it's taking hours and hours for them to get search warrants, and that results in overtime. And guess what? Police chiefs don't like that, city managers don't like that, and the board of supervisors don't like it either when they have to take care of our purse strings. So that's one thing I would do. And it is important that we have their trust, but it's also important that we have their respect. That's why I have the support of 3 current police chiefs, many retired police chiefs, and the sheriff, because they know that I know where the line in the sand is when officers are right and when they're wrong. And they listen to me when I tell them they've been wrong, and they listen to me when I congratulate them when they've been right. Thank you.
Thank you. A follow-up, which I think you anticipated, and I want to ask about how you would, as DA. Oh, I'm sorry, AJ.
It's okay.
No,
Whichever
I
way you
know.
want it, it's no big deal. I just say that I don't think that those items are mutually exclusive. When I was in charge of our misdemeanor unit and our DUI prosecution units, I would go frequently to shift changes at all times, and that's 7 a.m., 7 p.m., sometimes in the middle of the night, and go and speak with law enforcement officers. And the dialogue really is what's critical there, mutual communication between law enforcement and district attorneys. It's absolutely correct that we need to have mutual respect and open lines of communication. And when you do that, then when you do have to hold officers accountable, it's easier because they know what you're about and they know that you have the best interests of the case, of the community in mind. It's not about attorneys lecturing police officers, and oftentimes there's a belief that because, hey, we went to law school and we're being yelled at by judges that we should therefore inform aggressively officers when the cases are screwed up. That's not what it's about at all, because very often law enforcement officers are providing critical information right back to us if we're willing to listen about how we're doing in court, about different practicalities that we can't appreciate. And the more you can engage in those dialogues, the more you can go and develop that relationship with each individual agency, then when the cases come about that you do need to hold officers accountable and the separation is there, it's much easier. When I had to train and brought post-training to Nevada Police Department and developed their trust and respect through going through numerous shift changes, when I ultimately had to have a police accountability issue involving a Nevada officer accused of embezzlement, there was no issue there because they understood where the office was and there was no conflict at all. But you have to be there the other 364 days of the year as well.
And I apologize. So, moving to the specific instance of police misconduct, tell us how you will handle cases of police misconduct, including police-involved shootings, violence, corruption, or fraud. And I believe Lori is up first for this one.
They're going to be factually driven depending on what type of situation it is. In a shooting, usually another agency is going to come in and investigate. So I think it's a difficult question with such a broad variety of what you suggested. I don't know if you're driving towards the body-worn camera situation. I'm not a fan of releasing that information right away, but I think it's really important that law enforcement already knows what standard we hold them to. They know the penal code that we rely upon to determine charges, and they know when they're wrong, and if they violate the law, that we're not going to file their charges, and they may even be subject to charges. So I think having clear guidelines for officers is important. I think we already have those set in my office. If they've done some type of misconduct where they catch what's called a Brady flag, which is conduct of moral turpitude or something that is exonerating to a defendant, that we have to disclose that. We have a system set in place in our office for that as well. For example, if an officer catches a DUI and they're on probation, we have to disclose that. If they have something in their past that is of moral turpitude, which could be any type of thing that could affect their credibility, we have to disclose that. Recently, we had such an incident in my office, and we did disclose that information. So it's really factually driven, but officers know they're not above the law. And I think any district attorney, including myself, would hold them to any standard that we would anyone else, if not higher, because people look to them and they look to us to hold them to be accountable. That we have to be accountable as well. Thank you.
It's a beefy question. The whole idea here is that, yes, there is no one who is above the law, and it's our job. It's our job to hold our own police officers accountable when the issues of misconduct, especially when it rises to the level of criminality, comes to us. And we do need to take that bull by the horns and make sure that we're prosecuting officers, if they're charged with a crime, or potentially charged with a crime, by the same standards we would anyone else. The public needs to have confidence that their district attorney's office is going to do that, that there is no over-aggression, but also no leniency either, that it is not acceptable for individuals who, under color of law, get advantages for those things. It's difficult to wrestle with, though, in that obviously all cases that come through, there isn't always the highest level of transparency to the general public about why cases, what happens with them. And so we need to battle with that as well. And so there may come circumstances, and again, I do believe that there is no one size fit all, but when you have officer-involved shootings or high levels of potential officer-involved violence or fraud, as the question mentioned, that you may need to reach outside of your individual agency. I do believe that the primary responsibility should be in your county. You are the one to hold people accountable. But there may arise situations where the appearance of impropriety for having your own agency deal with the case would be so much that the public could never wrap their head around it, in which case we would bring in, I believe, either the Attorney General, or we would forge relationships with, say, Napa or Sonoma County, so that we could bring in what appeared to be conflict-free either district attorneys to prosecute those things, just so that the public has that confidence that there is absolutely no conflict here. Although I have utmost confidence that we could do that, the public needs to believe that as well.
This is one of the reasons why we need a change in the DA's office. The DA should already have a protocol up online that walks through exactly what needs to happen in a situation like this. Other counties have one. Sonoma has one that's quite robust and that I would look to as a starting place for ours. Any investigation of police misconduct must be transparent, independent, and fair. And the way we do that is we lay out the procedure in advance. And the procedure includes, how do you decide when another agency needs to take over the case because the Marin DA's office might not be able to have the distance needed to make an independent investigation. That's in there. It's built into the protocol. We make the decision. We have arrangements with other agencies, other jurisdictions that can take over, and we would do the same for other jurisdictions as well. Build it into the protocol. When do we decide to release body-worn camera footage? That's another decision that needs to be balanced. We must have a independent and fair investigation. We don't want to compromise the quality of our investigation or officer safety. So to do that, we have to balance those considerations and make sure we keep it transparent. So we want to release video as soon as possible, but without compromising those important values. That will be built into the protocol. All of these things need to be laid out in advance, and it's one of the first things that I will do if I can get elected as district attorney, is make sure that we have this in place so we're ready if a case should, unfortunately arise.
Being the DA is essentially a management job. You'd be responsible for many staff and a multi-million-dollar budget. Please describe your approach to management and any management or operational changes that you would like to make in the office if you did assume the role of DA. And I believe that AJ is up first for this question.
Sure, I think that actually DA is very unique in that it is a significant component of management. It's a significant component of subject matter expertise to advise on practical matters that are presented every single day, as well as leadership and direction. It is not just a management job that I think diminishes the role of setting policy that the district attorney has. But in answer to your question, in terms of my experience, I sit as a two-time former board president of the Reed Union School Board, where we provide governance and oversight to a $20 million budget, 160 employees. I have significant experience in guiding through that budget, strategic planning, employment issues as they arise, and consult on litigation, negotiations with employees, employee contracts. So these are not foreign concepts to myself, which would be regularly coming up in the role of district attorney. In the second part of your question, you asked about change. And I think in terms of my personal philosophy, I believe change best occurs when it's organic and it's when it's informed by the people who have to implement those change. I'm running for district attorney. There's a lot of lofty ideas. I have a lot of ideas of things that I may want to implement in this county, but the shape of how those changes happen is going to be fully informed by the people who are boots on the ground. And they may have some better ideas about how to implement things like treatment-based prosecutions. They may have a very, very robust set of ideas that I've never thought of. And I think that ultimately, if there's a change from leadership, it would not be one that's top down. It's not my leadership style. It's not my management style. I would like to engage in a long-term strategic planning session, not just with the internal stakeholders in our office, but the external community, to talk about what the shape of criminal justice should be over the next 5 or 10 years, and then start taking steps, break it down piece by piece, year by year, month by month, and move from there. And I think everyone has a role in that, every stakeholder, internal and external, and that's how I'd begin.
I was assistant chief in my office at Department of Justice, managing an office of 40 people. I know that the skills that it takes to try a great case and be a great trial lawyer are different than the skills that it takes to manage an office, because I've done both. I was very fortunate when I was at Department of Justice to have a personal executive coach for 9 months as a manager. I was also flown out to Washington to the Department of Justice to have intensive monthly management training just to learn how to make this happen. When you have an office in a government institution, there are a lot of different considerations that you have to balance. There's a tight budget that you've got to deal with. You have employees who are, many of whom have been there for a long time, some of them who are brand new. How do you take them together and make sure you get the most productivity out of every single person in your office? Setting an agenda, setting the policies that are going to drive the office for the future. These are all skills, and skills that I've taken some time to develop and to build. For example, I bring up the point of different ages because it's one of the greatest challenges that we have as a manager in a government institution. I was brought in to help with a case where we had a senior attorney and a junior attorney, neither of whom were functioning at their highest. The problem was neither of them was being directed towards their strengths. Our senior attorney was a great negotiator, yet he'd been assigned to do witness prep. Our junior attorney was a great go-getter. She's going to give great trial addresses, but she had a different assignment that wasn't working for her either. I was able to go in there, assign the cases in the right way, and at the end of the day, our senior attorney pleaded out the case to a great resolution. Our junior attorney ended up doing the witness prep she wanted to do, and in fact, they ended up being good friends, working together for in the future. That's the kind of leadership, that's the kind of problem solving, that's the kind of skill set you need as a manager to get the best out of every single employee in your office. There's a lot of great talent in the Marin County DA's office. I want to take that talent and boost it up to the next level. That's the job of your manager, of a good manager, and I'm excited to do that and ready to bring my skills to make sure that we're performing at the absolute highest level.
So I do quarrel a bit with you that this position is primarily a management position. That's not in any way, shape, or form how I see that. As I said earlier, if that were the case, we could just hire a really experienced office manager and the DA could go about doing other things. So it really, this job title actually is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in the county. It's not the sheriff, which some people think it is. It's the district attorney. And with that comes a leadership role, not only within the office and in the courthouse, but out in the community. And again, that's why my platform is connecting the community to the courthouse, because I have the experience and knowledge to know we have a problem. We do not have the trust of our community. Our crime rates are down, specifically in the canal area, because people aren't reporting crimes because they're afraid. If we don't acknowledge that and get the trust of that community, things are going to get worse really fast. So to get back to your question, within the office, it is going to take a leader, and I think it has to be someone who leads by example, someone who's present every day, who's respected by the staff. For those of you who haven't heard me speak before, there is a serious lack of equity in my office. If you don't have a law degree, you are not held in the same stead as other people, and half the time your voice just doesn't matter. So we have a vast majority of employees in our office who are really, in my mind, suffering, and that's going to change. And they look to me, they trust me with their future, and that's an important thing that I will carry with me. That's why I want to have an efficiency study, so they can actually show us and we can show our community and our Board of Supervisors who handle our purse strings how hard we work for them. AJ talked about case management. Our misdemeanor expediter handles cases, misdemeanor cases. Sometimes she'll spend hours on a case for somebody with a mental health problem, but we never quantify that for the board or anyone else to know how hard we're working. So that's how I would start. Number one, the experts in my office are the people within, and I would look to them before I'd make any major changes. And I would also not replace the number 2 person in position right now. That's an empty spot, and it should stay empty for a long period of time.
A recent survey or study came out indicating that Marin County has very high levels of disproportionality, particularly with respect to the youth juvenile justice system or juvenile law enforcement context. So as the DA, what concrete steps would you take to reduce disproportionality in the juvenile and criminal justice systems in Marin? I believe, Anna, you're up first here.
There was a study called Race Counts that came out in January, and it showed that Marin County was the #1 most racially unequal county in the entire state of California. A follow-up seminar that I attended showed that it was driven primarily by 2 things. One was inequality in housing, and that's something that many of us talk about. The one that we don't often talk about is the inequality in the criminal justice system. Those were the 2 main drivers. One statistic that's really stuck with me is that Latino youths are twice as likely to be arrested for curfew violations as white children. Black children are 14 times as likely to be arrested for a curfew violation. That shows that we have a deep, deep problem with our criminal justice system with respect to youth. And I know, having been a longtime volunteer on our youth court, which is our restorative justice program, that kids are not getting access to that equally as well. So what do? A few things. One is often someone's first contact, a child's first contact after they've engaged in misconduct is with someone at their school or with law enforcement. We have so many different jurisdictions in the Marin County, 11 different school jurisdictions, 12 law enforcement jurisdictions. We need to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. I'd like to issue some standards that everyone can use to identify which cases are going to restorative justice and which ones are not. So we eliminate that subjective bias. Everyone needs to get implicit bias training. I've had multiple implicit bias trainings at DOJ and as a manager, and I learned something new every single time. It's critical. We also need to train. We need to do better training and hiring a more diverse workforce, talking about this issue from the DA's office, leading on this issue, and making sure that our law enforcement and our attorneys on the same page, that this sort of racial injustice will not be tolerated anymore.
Thank you. Again, this comes back to trust and having our deputy district attorneys have a great relationship with law enforcement and the trust of our community. Youth court is, I think, our future, and I think it's really an important factor that, as noted, young men and women in Southern Marin and Marin City are not getting access to youth court. One of my colleagues was on the court floor on Thursday at 4:30, where we hold youth court, and I encourage everyone to go see it, he said, you know what, first time ever I saw a young individual from Marin City at youth court. That's got to stop. We have to have equal access all the time. And if it's a money situation or a travel situation, we need to bring youth court to Marin City or wherever the need is. It could be Novato, until we can get it to a point where every child has access to youth court, because that is a diversion program to keep them from being involved in the system, and that really is the key. Once they set foot in the system, statistically we know it's not going to be a great picture for them afterwards, and so we want to keep them out of the system to the best of our abilities. So I think that's an important factor. Partnering with groups such as Alcohol Justice and other youth groups to use their resources. Church groups in Marin City. I was down in Marin City last week speaking to 2 leaders, and it's very clear a lot of times they see long before law enforcement does when there's a problem. If we had their trust and they would call us when they could see a young individual in trouble and keep them from crossing that line and getting in the system, that's the kind of trust that I'm talking about in our community. The other thing within our office, we need to rotate the assignment of our juvenile deputy. I've been in that office 28 years, and there's only the second person to ever have that juvenile assignment in the district attorney's office. That's just not acceptable. Everyone needs equal opportunity to that job, and they also need the experience. Thank you.
So just in general, I think, good data should inform good decisions, and there was the race count survey, which had these broad conclusions and metrics which were applied to all of the counties in the state of California, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the data. So I saw those numbers, especially around juvenile citations, not necessarily arrests, for truancy and those sort of things. I called up our chief probation officer, as well as the head of our youth services, because I've known for several years that our juvenile hall is empty. So to have the numbers sit out there at these high amounts, it was worth a further conversation. And the response from our juvenile hall, the head of our juvenile services, was, look, yes, these individuals may be cited more, but that doesn't end the conversation about data. We should find out, is there being an intervention that's being suggested afterwards? Because they're not ending up in juvenile hall. That place is empty. So when I say the good data needs to inform the process, we need to then dig deep after the race count survey and said, okay, look, let's look at these citations. Are they all one individual school? Are they all one individual officer? Are they spread out? Because that should then define how we intervene. I don't think we jump to immediately a broad characterization of all law enforcement trying to do X, Y, and Z towards our youth. Once we have the data, I think that will inform our next steps. That being said, regardless of what happens, there does need to be an equalization of how citations for truancy and those sort of things are referred to our restorative justice programs, because they are different. They are different from school to school. Many of you may or may not know we have school resource officers. Each individual police agency has the option of embedding a school resource officer to have a better relationship with high school students. And we do need to make sure that we equalize when those officers are utilizing citations versus referrals to restorative programs. And only then can we sort of level the playing field among the different groups.
I'm going to turn to some audience questions, many of which overlap with other questions on my list. So I'm going to ask the first question, what is your position on the death penalty? I'm going to start with Lori.
So this is one of the hardest questions to answer because, as I noted, the district attorney is the chief law enforcement officer in the county. We all know the death penalty system is broken. It's not functioning properly, and it leads to incredible costs, incredible pain for people. But the bottom line is a district attorney's job is to evaluate crimes when they're presented to our office, look to the penal code and see what, if any, criteria set forth in the penal code matches the crime that you have, and look at possible situations such as mental illnesses, drug addiction, self-defense, and whether or not a case would meet the criteria for special circumstances. And those are all really serious considerations. I could not, as the elected district attorney, sit here and tell you that I would not consider the death penalty, because that's our job, is to consider all the laws as they apply. Whether it would end up being something on the table is a totally different issue and be factually driven. But I can't make a promise that would be contradictory to the job that I'm asking for, and that we're duty bound to at least consider all of the laws. It would be just as wrong to say I would ask for it in every case where it might apply, when in fact a victim's family might not be in support of it. That's a big factor that we always take into account. So I understand that might not be the most answer that people want to hear, but it's an honest answer that I think any district attorney who wants this job and is going to follow the law should answer. Thank you.
I'm opposed to the death penalty. I'm also opposed to it as an organization, and those are very, very different questions. And as an organization, I do not believe the Marin County District Attorney's Office should be seeking the death penalty. It is a very broken and expensive system. We've only executed 13 people since 1979 and haven't executed anyone in over a decade. If you are concerned with the possibility of executing innocent people, you have to be in favor of due process. And due process takes time. Due process is expensive. And that system of due process, the state appeals, and the federal habeas petitions are built in. They fall part and parcel with the death penalty. It is not a system that, as it exists presently, is anything more than an empty promise to victims that we're going to pursue the harshest penalty for horrible crimes. And every special circumstance potential crime is a horrible crime. That is not to minimize the experience of victims and their families or their need for closure, but as a matter of policy, as a matter of individual functioning of an organization, it breaks small offices to pursue the death penalty. We allocate our best attorneys for all of our special cases, special circumstance cases, even ones where you may just think about having the death penalty and wait. It poses enormous costs on an organization because when you do that, a defendant gets a second attorney. When you do that, you have to put your best counsel on it. When you do that, you have to put two juries, essentially, and an inordinate amount of resources behind doing it if you want to do it right. But it is not simply a matter of following the law. The law makes this a discretionary penalty, one which many counties do not pursue because of the costs and other resources. I believe that it is a penalty provision that is outside of the values and priorities of Marin County, as they've spoken numerous times on this topic.
I'm opposed to the death penalty. It is not a deterrent to crime. It does not make us safer. It is fiscally irresponsible. It is racially biased, socioeconomically biased. It is an anachronism in today's world. And I will do everything I can through the legislative process, through advocacy, to bring an end to the death penalty in California. One place where I part ways from my opponent here is that the district attorney does not have unlimited discretion on this point. The district attorney can be removed from office by the state, can be removed from a case by the state attorney general, and this has happened not only in California but in other places across the country. Most recently, we saw it happen in Florida, where Aramis Ayala made a blanket promise never to pursue the death penalty. She was elected, had 25 capital cases taken away from her. In fact, one of them is now being pursued as a death penalty case. A prosecutor's, district attorney's greatest power is our power of prosecutorial discretion. By making blanket promises at this point, we risk that prosecutorial discretion. I believe the best way to fight against the death penalty is to do it through our legislative and advocacy process, and that's where I will put all of my effort. And I will uphold the law and consider the laws that we have in California so that I do not risk losing my prosecutorial discretion as your district attorney, which I think is the best result for Marin County.
A number of questions received about the immigrant population here in Marin County. I'm going to just read a card to you that I think summarizes the gist of the concerns. Marin County has a substantial immigrant population, especially in San Rafael and Novato. Please discuss your experience and views about the role of the district attorney's office on immigration issues and how you will protect the immigrant community. I think, AJ, you're up first here.
We do indeed have a significant immigrant population here in Marin County, and these are individuals who provide vital parts of our community. Whether you are documented or not, if you are making a living within the county of Marin, in any way, shape, or form, you are part of this community. And it's the job of the district attorney to keep all community members safe. I'm very proud to have a role in a formation of our office's policies regarding how the office should consider immigration consequences of individuals who may be charged with certain levels of crimes. It's incumbent on our office to take into account a person's background, all sorts of background, not just immigration consequences, age, disability, mental health, addiction, all those things, when fashioning plea bargains. But the reality is we, the district attorney's office, have one of the greatest roles in how we handle criminal cases and the ramifications of deportation and admissibility for individuals who may be less than fully documented. It's my strong belief that our office needs to be fluent and nuanced in that and have essentially a sliding scale of how we take into account in the disposition of our cases a person's immigration consequences, where at the beginning of a person's criminal history, you take that into account significantly because people can make mistakes. But as you move forward with more criminal acts or in seriousness, that consequence goes away. And I believe that's in line with our values as a county, that we give people opportunities regardless of whether or not they are less than fully documented or not. We do that for everyone. And I think that's our primary role. It's within the ambit of what the district attorney's office needs to be doing, and I'm proud to have a role in the formation of a policy that's in line with that, a change from, frankly, the previous generation of prosecutors who had a colorblind philosophy, leading to lots of inequities on this topic.
So the role of the district attorney is to promote safety in the community. And I support our sanctuary state because I believe it makes us safer, and here's why. When the administration changed, when the new administration in Washington changed in early 2017, the number of domestic violence calls that came from our canal area plummeted. And they plummeted. The number of people asking for help from the police dropped. And that's not because domestic violence stopped. That's because we had a whole community that retreated in fear. And that's what we're seeing now. We have between 12 and 14,000 undocumented immigrants right here in Marin County. And this is a community that has retreated into the shadows to the point where these children are not getting access to health care. People aren't going to food banks. They're not reporting crimes. This is a problem for all of us. How do we build back trust? Well, for me, this is very personal because my family is an immigrant family. My grandmother was born in Puerto Rico, as was my mother, and they came escaping a domestic violence situation to New York City to build a better life. They took that first step forward to bring our family out of poverty, and they did it looking for a safe community where they could get a good education and a good job. And that's the job of the DA here, is to provide a safe place where people can get a good education and a good job and make sure that everyone who's here and who's following the law is supported in our community. The way we build back that trust is that as the DA and the law enforcement community, we need to be out there. We need to be out there in these communities and talking to people, understanding the issues, building that trust back. Yes, of course, serious crimes must be prosecuted seriously regardless of someone's documentation status, of course, but we cannot have a community living in fear of being deported for a broken taillight. It's on the district attorney to get out there, to communicate, to build the trust back, and that's what I'll do.
I have actually spoken at immigrant rights forums. I have actually been in the community, and I am honored that one of the leadership programs in the canal, Alcohol Justice, supports me and invited me to one of their year-long celebrations of a leadership program last Sunday, where we were sharing stories in their back parking lot and watching young children dance and celebrate their leadership roles in the community. That's the kind of thing we need to do. Our victim witness advocates who support me are out in the community every day, and they made it clear from day one with the change in the administration that people are afraid and they're not reporting crimes, and we need to gain their trust or they're not going to report crimes. And I have been very active with probation and community leaders and making sure they see our faces and hear our voices and know that they can trust us. Police officers have to be hand in hand with us because they're the first ones who are going to be called when these crimes happen. And when people need safety, that's where they're first going to go. So we really need to be partners with our law enforcement partners, and that's where my experience comes in. For example, one of the fears that came out recently was the sheriff was publishing release dates of people from jail. Well, I was the only one who actually took my knowledge and said, I wonder what that means. So I found out what it means and have been working with the defense bar in appropriate cases to structure plea bargains, if you will, or dispositions that help a person avoid having a release date if possible. Now, we're not going to do that in every case. We're required by law to take into account a person's immigration consequences. So that's just one example of how my experience makes a difference in these situations. Also, I want to have a social justice DA. So when a person has suffered a prior conviction, we have a person who's actively not only looking at marijuana convictions, prior convictions, but if a person was convicted 20 or 30 years ago and they're currently in custody somewhere, even in ICE custody or INS custody, that we can proactively help them get their case changed to a status that it doesn't cause them immigration consequences if it's the right case. So those are the kind of things that I have the vision to take care of. Thank you.
So a couple of questions around the issue of how each of you would pay for the initiatives that you've identified as being needed. So each of you advocate for new programs or enhanced community outreach, a new family violence center, for example, more expansive mental health treatment opportunities. How would you propose to pay for the initiatives or the improvements that you have identified? And I believe Anna is up first now.
So the district attorney has an $18 million budget and has to stretch that to over 80 employees and all of the current programs that are happening there. That's tight. To get the kind of initiatives that we need in place to really move Marin County forward, we have to rely on external funding and leverage the nonprofits that we have here in Marin County. So I did mention this Family Justice Center, and how could we fund something like that? Well, what they do in Alameda is that Family Justice Center has a $1.2 million budget. Some of it comes from the district attorney's office, but 80% of it comes from grant funding. They have a full-time grant writer, which I know the current DA's office has access to a grant writer as well. Having a full-time grant writer who funds not only their own job, but can go out and get this money that's out there. We've got money for violence against women funds. We have crime victim funds. We have the money out there that we can access if we've got the full-time grant writer to make it happen. That's the way we've got to go. And then in terms of programs like restorative justice programs, diversion programs, youth court is run by the YMCA. It's run by the YMCA, funded by private funding, and there is also a contribution for some of the participants. But of course, we want to make sure that we can rely on private funding as much as possible to improve access to these programs. That's another great way that we can do it. So relying on our nonprofits, relying on our external funding, and stretching our budget to the most that we can do. Now, on that last point, stretching our budget, when I was a manager at Department of Justice, we did that. We stretched our budget as thin as we could, managing even the number of Post-it notes that we had. We all paid for our own business cards, we paid for our bar fees, because we knew that we had to prioritize the slim budget we had. So I've done that, I know how to do it, and I can do it here at the DA's office.
I wish I had a magic wand to pay for all the things that I think we need to do. It's certainly not going to come out of our budget. I know one of our Board of Supervisors is here today, and they are the ones that hold our purse strings, and I think that's the number one small answer to how we're going to get some of these things accomplished, and that comes from letting them know how we are working for them, making them look good, and in essence, making them proud of us. So I think that's on the small vision, just within the office, how things will work. Otherwise, we do have to collaborate. And unless there's going to be some magical answer of money trickling down from the heavens, which is not going to happen, it's really going to rely upon our community partnerships. But again, getting out there in the community, letting them see us, see the good things that we're doing, the children that we're helping, the adults that we're helping, it's not going to happen. And is something that's been lacking in our office. We do a lot of wonderful things, but it is time for change, and it is time to get out there and, for lack of a better term, wag our own tail and let people know the good things that we're doing for them, or we're going to not have a lot of things that we can be proud of.
So again, I come back to decisions are driven by good data, and this is not something that's foreign to me. When I was asked to take a look at the chronic alcoholics in downtown San Rafael as an issue, initially, people knew abstractly this was a problem that needed to be remedied, but there was no cause to action until I did a cost survey. And we sent a cost survey out to the criminal justice community, ambulance companies, Marin General Hospital for the 35 drunkest of the drunks, for lack of a better term. And we found out we were spending, as a system, $70,000 each of them each year. And that was the impetus for change. It was the impetus for seed money to try things differently. And you do need to make the financial case when you're talking about doing things differently, because there's no shortage of good ideas, but we do know that there's massive inefficiencies in the criminal justice system, and if we can quantify those costs, it makes spending money more compelling in the long term. This is not something that I don't have familiarity with, as I was for 3 years in charge of our federal grant-funded DUI prosecution unit, year after year, writing grant renewals and doubling our fundings every year, doubling our personnel for the years where I was there. I'm familiar with grant writing. When you're talking about innovation in criminal justice system, this is what organizations like the MacArthur Foundation want to do. This is what organizations like the Bureau of Justice Affairs want to do. They want DA's offices who are willing to innovate, and they are willing to give funding through grants to offices who are willing to collaborate, who are willing to be more than just tough on crime, but are willing to be smart on crime. That's actually part of their initiative. And because they are so desiring of these opportunities, I think it's a perfect time for a community like Marin to put forth mental health initiatives in collaboration with multiple organizations and put forth joint applications for these grants, which again, they're dying to give out.
I'm going to ask a 1-minute follow-up question for each of you. Public safety realignment, which was implemented a few years ago, as you're aware, shifted responsibility for supervision of whole classes of offenders from the state to the counties. And along with it came significant funding for many counties in the state. I'm not quite sure of the exact numbers for Marin, but I'm sure it is in the millions of dollars. Do you see public safety realignment funds at the county level as a source of funding for some of the initiatives that you identified? And if so, how would you go about securing some of that funding for DA's office initiatives? And I believe Lori should be first for this one. Thank you.
Yes, there is a sharp difference in the resources that are available to probation if they're under the AB 109 realignment supervision versus non-AB 109 realignment supervision. So the resources are amazing. We have to be very creative in trying to get access to that. For example, I was talking to a treatment provider about having more beds and more access for drug treatment out of the county. And the suggestion to go about it was to ask for AB 109 money. So that's something that we're going to be seeking in the future, to get more beds out of county. Sometimes if people are offered treatment or placed in treatment outside of the county, they're much more successful because they're away from their friends. And sometimes that's what's necessary to get somebody on track and focused to sobriety, for lack of a better term. So that's one way to do it. As far as actually getting the monies, I can't pretend to be intimately familiar with how to access more of those monies, other than I think the grant options are definitely one way to try and go about it. I would have to say recently our office actually received a grant, which we ended up that we turned down because we just didn't want to get involved in it. And I think that's something that we really need to stop. It's time for a change. It can't be business as usual. We've got to get outside of the box. And that is one thing that has been, I think, holding us back. And that's one thing I intend to do as the next district attorney.
So AB 109 did come with the promise of funding, and actually, the public should have a lot of faith that actually we used our money through AB 109 in an extremely judicious fashion. Basically, people who used to serve time in the Department of Corrections were sent to local jails, and pockets of money were sent to each individual county to deal with that. Many counties decided to use that money to make up more beds and have a higher, greater police officers. Those individuals, those counties that did that, spent through all their AB 109 money. We have a group of individuals, Health and Human Services, the probation, and the sheriff, who have been judiciously using all of the AB 109 money every year just for treatment, just for alternatives to traditional justice system. And they have been very judicious with those dollars, and they've been able to spread it out through all different types of programs. And yes, I think we could access AB 109 dollars because that's what they've been doing with those dollars ever since it passed.
So AB 109 funding is an opportunity to move away from incarceration and towards programs that keep people out of jail, either at the prevention end or from the recidivism end. And that means working collaboratively with the people who are already doing that, working with probation, working with law enforcement, again, to take those dollars, which will never be enough, and spread them out to get the maximum impact. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on using those dollars to reduce recidivism rates and to keep people out of jail and away from incarceration. So programs that I've been talking about today, those are the kinds of things we want to use we want to use this money for: the diversion, the restorative programs, supporting what probation's already doing because they've already got some great programs.
What is your assessment of the pros and cons of plea bargaining, and how frequent is its use here in Marin County? AJ.
Plea bargaining is not really that much different here than it is everywhere else. It's a method of which over 90% of cases are resolved in the state system, federal system, and plea bargaining is, I suppose, an unfortunate necessity. The system as a whole could not ever substantiate the number of jury trials needed if that was even the desired outcome for adjudication of every criminal offense. And I don't think it is. In fact, I think most people want to accept responsibility for their crimes and have a negotiated settlement that reflects fundamental fairness. And so I don't actually believe that the system needs to gear towards having every case end in a jury trial. In fact, a jury trial is what happens when reasonable attorneys can't come to a reasonable resolution. I do believe that they're a necessity, and I think that we endeavor to look at three different values as a DA when we have plea bargains. That's the interest of the victim, the due process rights of the defendant, and the safety of the community. And those are the three values that need to guide every single negotiation we have, from a DUI all the way up to a homicide. I believe that the DAs, the public defenders, and the judges here are all cognizant of those values, and they do the best they can as a whole. I mean, it's an art form. It's not a science, finding the best deal. Are there, of course, plea negotiations which can show up in the press and seem outrageous? That happens from time to time when you're dealing with discretion. But by and large, those values, I think, are being pursued by all parties to plea bargains, and I think that it's a good thing. We cannot have a system where every case goes to trial.
Plea bargains are an important part of our criminal justice system. They give a defendant an opportunity to accept responsibility for what they've done and to take a lighter sentence in exchange for saving the significant amount of resources that it would take to take a case to trial. And that's a good thing, so long as we make sure that everyone's rights are protected. The defendant has the full discovery they need to make sure they're making a full, voluntary, knowing agreement, that our victims' rights are respected, and that the process is done in a fair way where there's a balance of power. There's open discovery, for example. Both sides know exactly what's on the table. And that happens, that's in an office with an integrity, which every district attorney's office should strive to do their plea agreements with all of those things, to maintain the integrity of the office. When I was assistant chief of my office as a federal prosecutor, I reviewed every single plea agreement that went through our office and made sure that each of those elements was there. So plea agreements are an important piece. When a case goes to trial, though, you can't be afraid to go take a case to trial if the parties cannot agree. That's really important. So not every case is acceptable for a plea agreement. There are times when you have to say, this case is going to trial, and you can't be afraid to lose a case at trial. But you also can't be afraid to make the good, reasonable, responsible decision in a plea agreement if all of the right pieces are there.
So they're necessary. And in our office, as I stated earlier, the number one crime that we have is our DUIs. We have standard dispositions so that if anyone in this room were to be arrested for their first DUI, they could come to court and their offer would be ready, waiting for them in court, and they could be referred to see a public defender or get their own lawyer if they chose to represent themselves. On the first day they came to court, they could plead guilty knowing that their disposition, unless there's something unusual about their case, say there was an accident or a high blood alcohol level, that they're going to be treated the same as anyone else. And again, as I stated, by law, we have to take into account a person's immigration consequences as well, and our judges are very mindful of that. So the majority of our cases do resolve by standard dispositions. We have standard dispositions for, I'd say, 80% of the crimes that we have. It's the ones that require more scrutiny, such as our sexual assault cases and our DV cases, that are factually driven. Most of the cases that come through our office are eligible, not most, but many are eligible for diversion, which is a way to stay out of the court system. Many are eligible for restorative justice. I have been one of the first people to nominate and suggest people for felony convictions for restorative justice so that they can have their cases taken off their record after they've finished the program. So it is something necessary, and there are times when cases are so severe and serious or repeat violent offenders that cases for those type of dispositions require, I think, more scrutiny than they're currently getting. So overall, I think it's kind of a necessary evil, and it is necessary for the due process of all parties and for our victims.
So a couple of questions about gangs in Marin. Is there a gang problem in Marin? And if you want to speak specifically to an issue identified with the MS-13 Novato High School. So I believe that Anna is first up.
So I'm not currently in the Marin County District Attorney's Office, right? I'm the outsider in this race, so I do not know the internal workings of what happened during the prosecution of that case. What I can talk about comes from my view from the outside, and I'd like to talk about this from what I've seen with my time observing the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Protection Commission's meetings. This is a group that's convened by our judges to understand the way juvenile justice is working here in Marin County. And and I've been going to these meetings for 2 years now, and much of what we see is children who are swept up in the early stages of gang violence. And there's a concentration of it in the canal, and you see it starting with young children doing small, petty types of behavior, of crimes, like small thefts, stealing sneakers from friends. And it starts there as part of this gang process. And what I've been working on doing, actually, is trying to bring in some evidence-based interventions so that we can focus on prevention and make sure that we can understand why this behavior is happening and put an end to it before a gangs form, before the kids start escalating into more dangerous behaviors. That's what I'm seeing, and that's where I would focus my efforts.
Thank you. That's a current case that's pending, so we have an office policy, which I think is a good one, not to comment on cases before they've been adjudicated. But the bottom line as to the question is, if a person thinks there's no gang problem in Marin County, you're really deluding yourself. One of the first specialty assignments I was given was gang prosecution, and I handled probably at least 5 shootings in different areas in the canal and in Novato as well. And it continues to this day. Again, it goes back to Is it visible? Perhaps not, because people are afraid to report it. This goes back to the whole fear in our community. Also, the fear of reporting is part of the gang dynamics. That's how they survive and are successful at intimidating people, because they put the fear in people, and so they don't want to step forward. And it's very easy for a police officer, or even myself, which I've done on many occasions, is to get the cooperation of someone, but then to try and tell them that they're going to be safe when they go home to their community, maybe to their apartment they share with their family, and everybody knows they just came from the police department. That's when the fear really strikes for them. So it's something we need to be aware of, and it is something to systemically look at from a leadership level within the community and really get to our children and let them know there's other options. I think we should try and have people from the community, young men and women, as interns in our office, and let them see the staff in our office, the staff at probation, the staff in the public defender's office, and maybe they'll find a role model along the way and see there's a different way and a different path that they could take. But there clearly is a problem, and I think to pretend like there isn't would not be a wise thought.
I wonder if that's a trick question from someone who works at the bar about there's a rule of professional conduct on commenting about a current case. To say whether we have a gang problem, to have even one gang-related felony would be a problem. And I don't believe it pays anybody any dividends to bury your head in the sand. We do have, with some frequency, gang-related assaults, batteries, and yes, on occasion, homicides or attempted homicides here. Are the numbers anywhere close to Solano, Sonoma, or any of our neighboring counties? No, they're nowhere near as high. But that does not mean that we don't need to be diligent. We do. We don't, for whatever reason, the same level of gang activity for our neighboring communities that we're often compared to, we haven't had the same gangs take root in the same depth that we have in Sonoma and Solano in terms of the number. And I think that probably has to do to a degree with some of our economic stratification that we have here in Marin County, that we don't have as many communities where that could take root. That's not a good thing, though. It's not a good thing that we have any communities where there's economic stratification and two Marins as there are here. And so all of the risk factors that make individuals go into gangs are present in numerous communities within Marin County. We, on the prosecution side, need to be diligent about gang crimes as they come, but we as a community need to be concerned about all the risk factors: stratification in economics, separated housing, separate education systems, systems where there are not two adults in the home. All those are risk factors for people joining gangs. And so we as a community need to be concerned that we have those communities at all, but when we do have gang crimes, the DA's office needs to aggressively prosecute those crimes because there is higher potential for danger associated with them.
This is going to be the last question, and then I'll turn to your closing. What is the tone that you would set for the criminal justice system in Marin as the top law enforcement official in the county? And Lori, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Fair and independent with equity for all, I think, is the tone. I think if it had, I haven't made it clear tonight, community trust and the trust of our law enforcement officers is really, to me, I think crucial. I think it's, in this moment in time in history, really important that we acknowledge that and get out in our community, and as I said, let them see our faces and hear our voices and vice versa. So that's the tone that I would set, and I would do that by going back to the equity in my office, having our staff who are not attorneys go out with myself and other lawyers from our office to community events, cultural events, immigrants' rights meetings, make presentations, meet our police officers, meet our city council people and our police chiefs. I took a young group of individuals to our Prandy Center where we interview young children who've been molested or abused, and I took some students from Novato High, and one of my non-attorney staff members looked at me kind of wistfully and said, "Well, I've never been to the Prandy Center." And I thought, that's what we're lacking in this office. If our own staff is dealing with these cases and situations and hearing about all these things out in our community, in our justice community, but they don't even have a firsthand knowledge and experience. That's something that we need to handle, and it's such an easy fix to me that we can do. So I think that's the kind of leader that I hope to be in our community as our next DA. Thank you.
In terms of the tone, I think ultimately we do need to fully embrace best practices wherever they come from. And it's an exciting time in criminal justice. I know it's hard to say, exciting time, criminal justice, but people are doing things different. Every state is coming at criminal justice differently. And this is not a liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat issue. Every state is looking at criminal justice and saying either the current way of doing it is too expensive or it's not the right way, but whatever it is, every state's coming to the conclusion, let's do things different, let's try things. Let's try different things around focusing on treatment. Let's try different things around restorative justice. Let's try things about diverting people from jail. And so with that, exciting time is robust studies and establishment of best practices all over this country as well as other countries. And there are things that we can do that we have the opportunity to do here in Marin County because we have a baseline high level of safety. We are the safest county in the state of California, so we can embrace best practices from other places and try things that not every other county can. You can't embrace best practices if you're worried about 180 homicides a year. You're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. But here we have the opportunity to full-scale embrace and improve our already very good public safety system with practices that can be more effective at reducing recidivism, that can lower costs because we are an agency accountable to the people. And there are communities that are doing those things, and there are things that we don't need to remake the wheel for. We just need to embrace that we need to be more than just tough on crime. We need to be smart on crime. And so I want to reach out, look at best practices. It's what I've done my whole career, looking at restorative practices in this country and other places, looking at treatment in lieu of incarceration all over the country. And I want to bring that full-scale embrace of best practices for the betterment of our community here to this public safety system.
The job of the district attorney is to promote the public safety, but the DA works for you, for every single one of you, for every resident in Marin County. That's who the DA is working for, to make sure that you're all safe, to make sure that our county is doing the best that we can for every single person out there. That means the DA needs to be accessible, needs to be out in our community, listening, understanding what the issues are, understanding what the needs are, understanding what the best practices are from everywhere outside our county as well. I actually did it, I have a number of law students who are helping me with my campaign. And we called every single DA in the state of California to ask them, how do you measure accountability and performance? How can we do better there? Because we know conviction rates don't work. Conviction rates alone, which have been the standardized measure for a district attorney's performance for so long, are easily manipulated and don't work in today's world. How do we do better? How do we do better? And this is a question that prosecutors across the country are wrestling with. I've plugged in with a group of prosecutors based out in San Diego who are collecting best practices from across the country, and this is where I'm learning some great ideas that I'm hoping to pull into my platform, some of which I've talked about today, like a family justice center. But the tone is open, it's accessible, it's moving us forward, it's embracing the 21st century and learning from where we've been. It's taking the great foundation we have and taking a quantum leap forward from that. And that requires leadership, requires management skills, requires independence, boldness, and great relationships with people all around the county to make it happen, and that's what I'm going to do.
All right, so each of you now, time for a close. I think we're starting with AJ.
So that previous question was a big tee up into this one. Again, I think it is an exciting time to be running for DA. It's an exciting time to be interested in criminal justice, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being your next district attorney. This is a different job. It's a job that requires a mix of experience, management, and leadership. But ultimately, I think you've heard varying definitions of the need for change. And over the course of my career, I've been looking at our office and looking at how we can change it, but change it from within. looking at the practices and modifying them. That's normally how most organizations change. They understand where the organization came from and where it needs to go. I've pushed internally over and over again, established relationships with those community partners. I didn't do things like forming a housing in lieu of incarceration program by myself. It was a partnership between Health and Human Services, Probation Department, the Public Defender. I didn't create a restorative justice program by myself. I collaborated with, again, the Probation Department and other organizations to bring best practices here. I didn't create a council to look at veterans issues without inclusion of Health and Human Services, the VJSO. I've been walking the walk. I have been collaborating with other organizations for change from within my entire career, long before there was a DA race, and I'm not doing this because I'm allergic to free time, my family, and money. I do believe in change, and I've been trying to work for that change. I'm ready to hit the ground on day one because I already have those established partners. I already have those established relationships. I'm proud to say that I'm supported by the deputy district attorneys in the Marin County DA's office through their association. They've endorsed me, but I'm also equally proud to say that I have the support of the overwhelming number of current practicing criminal defense attorneys. And when you're talking about change, you're talking about bringing together parties and creating something new, and you need to have those partnerships in place. Those partnerships are those that have backed me in this race, and I hope you'll join me in that journey.
Thank you all again for coming out tonight. 70 years, more than 70 years it's been since we've had someone from outside this office bringing fresh ideas, bringing change, bringing boldness. This is what we need in Marin County to move the needle on these issues that have been so intractable. The inequities in our racial justice system didn't happen yesterday. They've been there for decades. Our homelessness problem has been here for years and years and years. Domestic violence has been our most common, prevalent, violent crime for decades. How do we move the needle on these important issues? We do it by bringing in a bold vision and the skills needed to execute that vision. With my skills that I bring from the DOJ as a manager and my deep, deep involvement in the local community, I can get that done. Let's do this. Let's do this for Marin County. Let's become safer. Let's become stronger. Marin needs a district attorney who's experienced, independent, and fair, and that's what I'm going to bring. I'm so proud to be endorsed by the Marin Democratic Party, Indivisible Marin, the Sierra Club, because they see that this kind of boldness, this kind of change is what we need right now. This is the moment. This is the moment, and this is why I'm running, to take Marin into the next century, to take us to the next level, to have us lead on these difficult challenges that have dogged us for so long. We can do this. I ask for your support in this race. Thank you.
So it's really important that your next district attorney have the experience, the know-how to get things done, the relationship with community partners, and also specific details as far as what they're going to do. It's really easy to paint with a broad brush and not really specifically say what you're going to do. And I'm going to go back to my handout outside. Day one, I said what my platform was. We're going to aggressively prosecute crimes of financial and physical abuse committed against our seniors. I'm going to ask our Board of Supervisors to give me a DA, and that's their only job. And when they are not in the courtroom prosecuting people for these crimes, they're going to be out in the community educating seniors, and they're going to be getting restitution for our seniors who are victimized. In the past 2 years, I've recovered hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution for seniors, and we need to keep at it because that's, in addition to our youth, we really have to keep an eye on our seniors. I was the one that had the vision to put this in my platform statement from day one. We're going to expand our restorative justice programs. Every candidate is going to be in support of restorative justice programs. Those are going to happen. So that's not really an issue, to me, a deciding factor in who you should choose as your DA. I think we need a veterans court, and I'm going to push for a veterans court here in Marin County. We have too many homeless veterans, too many troubled veterans. They're some of the people that have the mental health problems that we've spoken of. We need to address that. Guns, I am the only candidate in this race to even have the foresight to talk about guns. Guns are running up and down our freeways every single day. Today we had a shooting. We have guns almost every day in our courtroom. So what we're lacking right now when we seize a gun is to have the ability to track it and see if it's been involved in a crime. I'm going to push our next governor to get that testing mechanism back in our Department of Justice labs. And finally, the culture of the DA's office needs to change, and that's something that people haven't really addressed. But it's a reality, and I'm the person to change that. If we don't change ourselves from within, inside the box, it's going to be tough to get outside the box. Yes, it's time for change. You need somebody with the experience to make it happen, and I'm that candidate. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I want to thank all of the candidates for coming tonight. They've worked a lot. They've gone to a lot of these events, and I'm really very, very grateful. I'm extremely grateful to you, Leah Wilson. Great questions, very well done. Thank you very much. I want to thank our timekeeper, my son, Tris Kelly. And a special thanks to Marin TV and Damien for filming this. It'll be on our website in a day or so, and it'll also, for those of you, and please pass on to your friends, it'll be on YouTube under Marin DA Debate 2018. Thank you all very much for coming. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the City of San Rafael, which provided this venue, and for Kate Cullen especially for coming and joining us in that. Thank you.